TikTok videos are mainly small visual gags, choreographies of trendy songs, or life itself. Their videos tend to be short and simple. Despite that limitation, there is always room for the circulation of disturbing content, even though it is the most restrictive platform. We usually talk about images of explicit sex or violence, but what Claire Miller's followers saw was completely out of the ordinary. Day by day, they witnessed increasingly darker videos that reflected the serious mental problems the account owner was going through. The video you just saw would show the scene of a horrific crime committed by Claire herself. The 14-year-old girl was going through a hell that her followers didn't understand until it was too late. Mark and Mary Miller lived in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and were loving parents to their 2 daughters. The joy they felt when their first daughter, Helen, was born turned into absolute dedication when they discovered she had cerebral palsy. They soon knew that her life wouldn't be like other children's, as she couldn't speak and needed constant assistance in all areas of her daily life. From that moment on, they devoted themselves to providing her with all the therapies so that she could develop in the best possible. Thus, the 3 of them lived in a modest ranch of their own, which was adapted to make it comfortable for the little girl. The first few years dedicated to Helen passed until they found out that Mary was pregnant again. Fear and anticipation accompanied them during those months of waiting, and in the end, Mark and Mary's relief was immense when their second daughter, Claire, was born in 2007. She was a completely healthy baby, and her parents felt they had been given a second chance to navigate a, so to speak, normal upbringing, but it was far from it. From that moment on, Helen would have a future companion for the rest of her life. Claire was born with that destiny and seemed to fulfill it from a young age until she made another decision. Both girls went to prestigious private institutions and were encouraged in all their interests. Helen devoted herself to studying painting and sculpture with great success, even winning awards upon finishing high school. Claire was elected class president and participated enthusiastically in all kinds of extracurricular activities, such as the hockey team. Beyond school, she dedicated herself to hobbies like anime and horror movies. In those hours of free time, she discovered, let's say, early on the social network TikTok, where she shared those same interests with very acidic humor. At first, Claire found there an innocent window to show an apparently normal life. The 2 sisters were very close daily. It was common to see Claire helping Helen, reading, singing, and adoringly feeding her by mouth. Both were very good students. The Millers seemed to project the image of a happy family on the outside, but from a very young age, Claire knew deep down that Helen's life would never be like hers. And the most disturbing thing of all was when she began to think that the mere presence of her sister bothered her friends and close people. Claire gradually found in TikTok an escape valve to that life that was more complicated than it seemed. She spent more and more hours of the day filming herself doing lip sync and choreographies of pop music and anime dialogues, these classic TikTok things, or she interacted humorously with her father Mark, who was a regular guest on the channel. Neither he nor his wife approved too much of social media or anime, but they let her find her own way. Their intention was always to support their daughters in all their interests. Even if they didn't fully understand, they perhaps didn't look closely at the content that Claire shared on her social media, where she showed a very dark and at the same time very acidic humor, increasingly on the edge. From that point, at age 13, Claire began to show changes in her temperament, increasingly for the worse. Her way of dressing and moving made her a target for bullying from her schoolmates, who had once been a very popular student, was now isolated by her peers. But that was not her biggest problem, but rather deep and even more worrying conflicts were happening inside her. Shortly after starting high school, she told her father that she felt like a male trapped in a female body. Around the same time, she began to self-harm by cutting her arms, Her parents immediately took action and began assisting her with family therapy and various meetings with her pediatrician and the school. As welcome as those reactions were, Claire's problems were much more serious than they imagined or believed. She soon began to suffer hallucinations and hear voices giving her violent orders. On one occasion, her father walked into her room and noticed that Claire was having an apparently normal conversation with someone on the phone. It wasn't until he left the room that the man discovered Claire didn't have her device with her, but was talking to herself. Although for a while the teenager's situation seemed to improve, the lockdown now due to this disease we experienced a few years ago did nothing but make things worse. The family was forced to interrupt their family therapy sessions. Claire's written conversations with friends became increasingly odd. I feel like Batman. All I feel is anger. I have trouble trusting people. Batman and I could go out there. I can't look at people.
I want to hurt them a lot.
Sometimes I'm afraid to be alone with people because I don't want to hurt them. I'm not evil. As I tell you, these are messages from the girl, but the most alarming of all was the one that speaks directly about her feelings towards her sister Helen. I hate how people treat her and that she is going to spend her life in an asylum, that they have to take care of her. She's never going to fall in love with anyone. She'll never have children, even if she wanted to. Many of my friends are uncomfortable when we are with her. In this way, and just shortly before taking Claire's life, he wrote about his problems containing his violence. He felt the urge to hurt people, to kill. His thoughts were becoming increasingly macabre. He had obsessive ideas like owning a hotel where he could make guests suffer, or drowning people in a pool or with something that obstructed the surface. Then, one of the even stronger alarms was when he tried to take the life of his fish, named Captain America. However, a few days before the crime, he uploaded a very disturbing video to TikTok. In the video, he mentions two horror works that Claire was clearly a fan of, such as the famous Stephen King novel and movie Misery and the Korean comic Killing Stalking. In both, there are very gruesome situations of deprivation of freedom and suffering. That Sunday, the 22nd of February of the year 2021, nothing had happened out of the ordinary. According to their school routines, the two sisters went to sleep like any other night. Once their parents also went to bed, Claire woke up at 1 in the morning. She had in her hands a sharp weapon that she had taken from the kitchen with great caution. She deactivated the house alarm and proceeded to attack her sister without uttering a word. There were 7 knife attacks on the neck and chest. On the last one, she left it stuck in Helen's body. Only a few minutes passed when at 1:08 in the morning, she called 911 and claimed to have taken her sister's life. In shock, she went to wait for the police at the entrance of her house. She didn't even manage to change her clothes despite the freezing cold and being completely stained, bathed in red. She was wearing a blue blouse with a cat's face drawn on it and checkered pants, which was like an absolutely innocent outfit, which obviously contrasted with what had happened a few minutes earlier. The scene that the police officers found that night is something they will never forget, as long as they live, because the teenager had her pajamas splattered with red and was barefoot under the snow also stained with red. They spoke with her, initially convinced that some strange accident had occurred at home. The girl could only manage to tell the police that her sister Helen's body was in her bed in the upstairs bedroom. There they found her completely still, covered with a pillow and a knife still embedded. In the middle of the operation, the girl's parents woke up to discover the horrific scene. The noise of the police inside the house woke them up in the worst way. Although an ambulance was called and the officers attempted resuscitation maneuvers, it was already too late. Helen was taken to the nearest hospital where she was declared dead at 4:13 in the morning. A few hours earlier, Claire had written a totally chilling message to her closest contacts. Sorry guys, I killed my sister. Once Helen was taken to a hospital, Claire was immediately arrested and taken to a police station. I was my sister's Michael Myers. As a horror film fan, she found the reference to the classic 1978 Halloween film very fitting. That's because the serial killer protagonist of the movie takes the life of his older sister with a kitchen knife in the first few minutes of the film. In that sequence, Michael was only 6 years old. Once the question session was over, the police brought Claire a hamburger to eat. Surprised, she told him that if she had known they were serving McDonald's food, she would have committed a homicide sooner. Clearly, it wasn't merely a dark humor joke. This girl's mental disorder was in control at those moments. Claire Miller was immediately locked up in a female housing unit at the Lancaster State Prison while the investigation proceeded. She was assigned an officer who constantly watched her while she was awaiting the process, and since the charge was for homicide, she could not be released on bail. On the other hand, her parents were desperate to get back their only surviving daughter. In June of the year 2022, the Millers requested the court to handle Claire's case within the juvenile courts. Under that system, the sentence would focus on the young woman's rehabilitation and her supervision would end at the age of 21. But the judge denied the request. Considering that 5 years of rehabilitation were not enough in Claire's case and that she could continue to be a threat to the community, the Millers asked the court to allow Claire to undergo mental health treatment and await trial in freedom. They sought medical testimonies in her favor and found Dr. Susan Rushing. She interviewed Claire in order to have a concrete psychiatric diagnosis. The result was the dangerous combination of a depressive disorder, anxiety, and active psychosis, in addition to her gender dysphoria. And that's how the defense of this girl insisted that the murder had not been planned. She had prepared everything necessary to go to school the next day. With this argument, they sought to prove that he no longer intended to take his sister's life. In fact, his lawyers were convinced that he fought against his homicidal impulses. The fact that he turned on his computer, the only thing that kept her away from so much suffering, would prove it. In that version, it was the voices that led her to look for a knife. According to the defense, in Helen's room, her younger sister came in with the idea of killing the voices of her hallucinations. In turn, the prosecution had a stance, as you can imagine, contrary. For them, Claire was a threat to herself and everyone else, those who surrounded her. According to the detention center reports, she had not yet been stabilized with medication. In addition, no adolescent neuropsychiatric wanted to accept her. In the end, Amy Miller was convinced that Claire consciously sought out a defenseless victim who could not have killed another person that same night. Finally, on July 18, 2022, Judge David Workman decided that Claire would be tried as an adult. The decision was based on the judge's belief that Miller had a high likelihood of reoffending in his crimes. And here it is also necessary to delve into the issue of juvenile criminal responsibility in the United States, to in some way understand what each decision in this case implies. According to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, the minimum age for criminally prosecuting a minor should never be less than 14 years old, and it is suggested to set it at 16. In the United States, these rules are not followed in any of its states, as in some there is even no minimum age. But what is most striking is that the country violates another UN rule, by which young people can never be tried as adults. The immediate consequence is that children and teenagers can be sentenced to serve their sentence in adult penal institutions. According to reports from the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, in these prisons, they are 5 times more likely to suffer intimate abuse and violations compared to juvenile penal institutions. As expected, the story quickly resonated in the media. It had all the elements for sensationalist coverage. A loss of a minor, a disabled victim, high exposure on social media, and an obsession with showing off on TikTok. However, from the beginning, some media outlets chose a far-fetched hypothesis. Investigators were asked to look for the reasons for the murder in the movies and comics that Claire consumed. Naturally, this wasn't so. Horror movies or anime, more violent and disturbing than one can imagine, are watched by millions and millions of people around the world. Despite this, there are not millions of murders, not even a few thousand, committed by these viewers. Many times over the decades, American media have been tempted to blame supposedly controversial content such as movies, series, or video games for leading people to commit crimes. But in reality, the people who commit them have serious mental disorders, often undiagnosed or most of the time without the proper treatment. Claire was not too well known on TikTok before the crime, but she had a not at all negligible follower base. She had just over 20,000 contacts in a universe where the most famous TikTokers obviously have millions. However, it was a good amount for a minor like her. The news of her sister Helen's horrific murder caused her metrics to skyrocket in just a few hours, at least by 50%. In a short time, 11,000 people joined her account, undoubtedly looking for signs of the horrific crime that all the media were discussing or out of morbid curiosity. But without giving much room to sensationalism, TikTok quickly took down Claire's account, called Spirit Such Consulting. Regardless, the videos kept circulating because what once enters the network does not leave. Since then, they were shared by those who had downloaded them before they were deleted. But her new fame caused a truly disturbing phenomenon. It's about the fan accounts of Claire opened after she committed this abhorrent action and somehow vindicate what she did or applaud it. But you can't hold TikTok responsible for not preventing Claire's crime, but her warning signs on social media were there, just like in the messages she was sending to her friends and acquaintances. On March 10, 2023, Claire Miller pleaded guilty before Judge Jeffrey Wright. The judge considered that the defendant suffered from mental illnesses that drove her to commit this atrocity, but that was not enough to consider her insane or unaccountable. Miller herself detailed that she had been treated for depression and for an unspecified psychiatric disorder. She's still on medication and receiving psychiatric care. But similarly, two complex issues arise here to fully understand the judge's decision. First is the concept of criminal irresponsibility, as it is known in most Latin American countries. In the penal codes, those people who, at the time of committing such atrocities, did not have the ability to understand it are considered irresponsible. Generally, the reasons for declaring someone irresponsible are related to severe mental illnesses or a severe temporary disturbance of consciousness. One of the ways experts come to the conclusion that there was a disturbance in consciousness is if the accused cannot remember the events as they occurred. When someone tries to be declared irresponsible for dodging a prison sentence, they often claim the inability to remember the circumstances of the crime. Claire, however, never denied the murder or omitted the event details. He pleaded guilty and made his mental illnesses public in order to seek a lenient sentence given his situation. The judge acknowledged the existence of these problems but did not grant him the benefit of insanity, guilt. By declaring her mentally ill but not mentally disabled, a categorical distinction was made. A mental illness can be cured or may last for a while, whereas a mental disability is a permanent condition. Apparently, Chloe was in the first group and had to pay for her crimes in jail. The judge favored her in another way in the sentence, because considering it was a third-degree murder, the sentence was much more lenient than if it had been categorized otherwise. In the other two options, first-degree murder refers to a premeditated homicide. It can even involve a long period of planning. Second-degree murder, on the other hand, is a type of crime where there is intent, even though it was not planned. The most common examples used to explain it are homicides committed during a robbery to avoid being discovered or to escape, or homicide in a state of violent emotion during a fight. Again, This girl's mental illness was taken here as a mitigating factor of her guilt. And finally, the court determined that, according to the reports received, Claire had suffered a psychotic break during which she took her sister's life. The fact that the outbreak can be caused by situations of extreme stress or a traumatic experience finally explains the condition of third-degree homicide. Claire was finally found guilty of her sister's crime, although her specific sentence has not yet been made public. The sentence has a minimum time of 12.5 years and a maximum of 40, and she is serving it in a women's penitentiary in Pennsylvania, where she receives medication and therapy. There has been no news of Miller's legal situation since March of the year 2023, so there are still no details on how many years of sentence she will end up serving. These years have seen the Millers seek by all means to alleviate the sentence of their only surviving daughter. Perhaps the guilt that Claire is her sister's murderer will haunt them, or no, likely forever. And the mourning for Helen's tragic death probably won't ever come to an end either. If you enjoyed this video, note that it's posted on Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Sundays. To see more mysteries, check out recent short video compilations available every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Thank you.